Good morning. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about, I'm going to base it like I always do in metaphysics and mythology, and then I'm going to apply it to counseling and how you can use this system in counseling with your clients. Let me share the screen. Can you guys see that? So a little bit about sort of Greece. In Delphi in Greece, there is a oracle. So in a lot of the mythologies that you might have heard, like Narcissus or Cassandra, they're given an oracle. The oracle Oedipus, they're saying, you're going to take out your eyes or your father's eyes. You're going to kill your father, marry your mother. Don't let Narcissus's case, your son ever look at himself because he'll fall in love with himself. We get a lot of our theories in psychology rooted from these myths. So today I'm going to talk to you about a myth of Procrusto, but this is the image. This is the Oracle of Delphi. And what the Oracle of Delphi has, which is so important, is a famous quote that says, "Man, know thyself, and ye will know the wonders of the universe." So when people come to us for counseling, all they're trying to do is understand themselves better. So I've dedicated, obviously, a lot of my teachings for you guys, for you to understand yourself better. Therapists that don't do their own work suck, and they do harm. And that's not what we're here to do. So if you don't know yourself and you don't understand what's happening with yourself, we're going to talk a minute about judgments as confessions. Then you're going to harm the client, and you're going to sort of transfer your own crap onto the client. And that's not what therapy is about, and it's not what this lifetime is about. However, we do learn from the client. We understand that everything happening to the client is in reference to ourselves, and we have to do that sort of inner work, and it's a feedback loop. And I've told you guys before, I don't have any client that I don't apply, maybe not everything in the session, but something that stood out to my own life. Because who am I to believe that I have advice to give or guidance to give that I don't need for myself? So we have to keep this in our mindset at all times, that whoever sits in your chair is someone that perhaps needs your guidance, but you need that same wisdom. So in my book, The 7 Gates, I have a chapter called Milking the Moment. And I call it as an intuitive tool, but for therapists, you can also use it for sort of what you need in the session. And I say that, let's say you set your alarm clock at 2 o'clock in the afternoon every day. So at that moment, when that alarm goes off, you're thinking something, hearing something, or saying something. And what one of those three is happening, that's guidance. That's something you need for yourself. So today's class is obviously applicable to the counseling setting, but like always, what can you glean from it? So man, know thyself. In mythology, in metaphysics, in psychology, in spirituality, all the things that I bring to you, it's always about knowing yourself. We have masks. We live in delusion. We're not honest with ourselves. And my daughter laughs and says, "Oh, Mom, you're in, the business of telling people the truth they won't tell themselves." And that, in part, is part of the counseling process. I'm talking to the client, asking them questions, giving them additional resources so they can sort of have these ahas. And we guide conversations and ask the right questions so that they can kind of connect the dots. So that's the beauty of our field, is that we're helping people. I don't think that necessarily I always refer it back to self, but we're helping people, in essence, know themselves. And you will know the wonders of the universe. All of these counseling tips, all of these counseling techniques are really about understanding the larger universe, the larger world, how things happen, outside of ourselves, and the reflection that they have within. That's more depth psychology, Jungian. I tell you that I practice from more of a Jungian lens, but that's really in essence. And Jung, like myself, was a metaphysician, was an astrologer, so of course I have to bring in those tools because those are the laws of the universe. If you understand the laws of the universe as a metaphysician like I do, then of course counseling makes sense and behavior change makes sense. A lot of you, obviously, because you're in a psychology program, are learning it opposite. You're learning sort of counseling theory, and I'm bringing in the metaphysics to sort of pad to give you the background. So it doesn't matter which way you skin the cat. You have to get to the sort of metaphysics, the universal laws, understanding how all of this works so that you can understand why you're using the theory that you're drawn to. So this symbol is called the squared circle. I've told you guys this before, that if I had a tattoo, it would be this. The outer circle represents the universe, the bigger universe as a whole. The triangle represents the thought. It all starts with a thought, an idea. The square, and we're going to talk about the triangle and the square today. The square represents the limitations, the earth, putting it into practice, the rule book in my model. And then the inner circle is just like the outer circle, it's just the inner God. It's the inner universe that's happening inside of you, and those two are resembling one another at all times. Interfered with thought and discipline or limitations is what keeps us from achieving this knowledge of self and this knowledge of the universe. But if we do this inner work, which is oftentimes what's happening in counseling, then we do what I'm going to call today hard corners, soft edges. We address the thought, and then we get in connection with the larger self, the larger universe, the creator, God, whatever your client wants to call it. So I've talked to you about the Kybalion before. The Kybalion is the text on the basic universal or metaphysical laws. If you want that emailed to you, I'll email it. For those of you who came to my lecture on Post-it Note Spirituality, I went through those laws. Today, I'm going to focus, and it's directly related, and I'll talk to you about behavior change today, but it's directly related to my model of the 48 to 52 and the 0 to 100 that I talk about all the time. That comes from a metaphysical principle called the principle of rhythm. And it says everything swings to the right and everything swings to the left. And it swings in proportion. So if you're extremely, extremely happy, then the counteraction is you're going to be extremely, extremely sad the next day, the next week, the next year. And that's one of the reasons why I asked the client, when did it start? What's the origin? What's the creation myth? What's the creation story? If you ask your client the beginning, for instance, of the happy, 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 or the sad, 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 you're going to see that they're going to live out this principle. So it's directly related to behavior. And in essence, and I'm going to go deeper into this today, equanimity or self-mastery or behavior change occurs in the 48 to 52 when you neutralize those swings from 0 to 100. And the question for today is this really the goal of counseling? Is 48 to 52, is equanimity or self-mastery really the goal of counseling? And your client is to decide. So I'm just kind of using this metaphysical principle, my theory, in essence, to oh, I lost the screen, hold on. To describe behavior change. Let me share again, sorry about that. Okay, can you see that? So as always, I have to share a myth. So there's a myth of Procrusto. Procrusto was an innkeeper, kind of like had an Airbnb. And he had this bed, like in this picture. And what he would do is every time that someone came to stay at his inn, he would put them on the bed. If the person did not fit to the bed exactly, he would stretch them out. Imagine someone stretching your bones head to toe so that you fit on a mattress the exact height and weight or length. If the person was too big for the mattress or too big for the bed, he would chop off their extremities. He would chop off their legs or their feet so that they fit. And this is a problem that exists in counseling. this idea of the one size fits all. Yes, you need to have a theory. You need to have some counseling theory, and your clients need to have a value system. They have to have a philosophy of life. Everybody needs a philosophy of life. In my 7 Gates book, I talk about the rule book. If your clients don't have one, which they do, they just may not know how to articulate, then you have them create it with the work that they do with you. You have to know what you stand for. You have to know what your values are. That's part of the bad bucket, good bucket philosophy. Is I buy into these, the Costco card of my parents, but I don't buy into some of them, and therefore I go to Nordstrom's and I have my own value system that varies from my parents. And we need permission to dethrone our parents. We need permission to adopt new value system. In the Dethroning Olympus lecture that I gave you guys the other day, and I'll post it on the Blackboard, the workbook, I actually have a handout in there of different value systems. I also have one in the 7 Gates for those of you who have the book, but if not, I'll post on the Blackboard the value systems. And one of the activities that you could do if your parents are alive, if you have this sort of conversation with them, is what values do they have or did they instill in you, and where did you sort of migrate from those values? Most of us don't migrate too far. We do the opposite. We don't do it differently. So you'll see, even though you're calling it by another name, your value system doesn't shift all that much from childhood, but it's good to identify what your value system is and what you stand for. But you need a philosophy of life. So religion used to satisfy this in society. We've sort of gone and moved away from that. Spirituality now is taking a big part of that, but a lot of people don't understand spirituality. They don't understand true spirituality. So therefore, like I said in that Post-it note spirituality lecture, they're saying words and things that they don't even know the foundations of. You need to know the root of what it is that you believe. If not, you're going to fall into this Procrusto myth of one size fits all, and you're going to just force everybody into this door or into this funnel that they don't belong in. And everybody is different, and that's part of what I'm going to talk to you about today, is getting that 48 to 52, or what I call being a little to the left of that. So your theory is going to be your sort of outline of where you practice, but you need to work with the client individually and have them fit somewhere in that theory. But if you try every single thing to fit every single client, you're going to fall into this. I am not, and that's when I'm not a believer of cognitive behavioral therapy or ACT. Those therapies are great. I'm not knocking them. They're just not my belief system. I don't believe that there's like 6 to 12 weeks of behavior and then behavior changes. That's just not my philosophy. But if that's your philosophy, if you're a behaviorist, then know your theory, know it well, and then have some wiggle room. Most of you are studying with me, so you're more Jungian, you're more psychodynamic, you're going to be more in terms of depth psychology and all the things I teach you, so you're going to have that sort of background, but this may not at the end of the day be what you like, and you'll go with another theory. That's fine. But you need a theory. Just like you need values in your life, you need a rule book in your life. Nobody doesn't have a rule book. Nobody doesn't have a value system. They may not know what the hell it is, and that might be your part of your counseling, but every single person has values. They make judgments, they have opinions, all that is your values. So you have to get very clear on what that is. And in counseling, you have to get very clear on what your theory is, because that's going to dictate your practice. In my case, and why I always go to myth and metaphysics, is because that's the foundation of depth psychology and Jungian philosophy. So today I want to talk to you about the golden ratio and the Fibonacci sequence. So you see here, I have this spiral. So this spiral is considered what we call the Fibonacci sequence or the golden ratio. They're related. They're not the exact same thing, but they are related. And this is what shows up in nature. Everything in nature, there are no straight lines in nature. I remember going to Morocco many years ago, and all of the artwork is all spiral and flowers and petals. There's no straight lines. And this is important Because if you go back to the philosophy of the squared circle right here, this is what we're doing with clients. Their inner God, their third chakra, their self, whatever you want to call it, with their outer world, which is their universe, their value system, their beliefs, whatever you want to call it, is interfered by the thoughts that are given to them at conception by their parents, their buckets. And the only way, notice that it's outside of the inner circle, the only way to the inner circle is through a door. Look at it, it looks like a door. That is the earthly door. That is what I call the hard edges. That is behavior change, making a difference. On Tuesday, we talked about the elements. So if somebody is afraid to initiating a date, initiating a request for more money, for their salary, put them in a leadership role. That was the thing that they have to actually do in their life. That's the earth element. We talked about the earth element. That's the door. Every single person has to put these hard edges, has to put some door so that they can access this inner circle, their inner self, their highest self, whatever you want to call it. Okay, so this symbol, why I love it, represents absolutely everything, metaphysical, psychological, it doesn't matter. It represents every representation of whatever we're teaching. So this golden spiral is found in nature. If you look at a pineapple, you're going to see the spirals. If you look at the flower petals, you're going to see the spiral. In a moment, I'm going to talk to you about Jupiter. I'm going to talk to you about the labyrinth. A lot of symbols that represent this. But notice that there's lines that make all these different little squares. Okay, I'm not a mathematician. I don't pretend to be. I can't really speak to you about the math, but apparently it's like A plus B, and then the ratio equals the small ratio. If you want to look it up, probably Emmanuel, that the websites can explain the math to you better. But what's funny is that spiritual growth, call it behavior change, in my language I call it spiritual growth, is mathematical. And so this idea that we have to do something is a lie. We do have to do something. We have to put in the earth element. We have to put in the hard edges that I'll get to in a moment. We have to put in the structure. We have to put in the daily routine. We have to put in our hard work, yes. But your growth is already somewhat dictated by the cycles that you're forced about through nature, through the seasons, and all of spiritual practices are around a circle. Medicine wheel, alchemy, astrology, they're all, planets, whatever it is, they're all related circular. So circular and spiral is something we're going to talk about today, and I'm going to show you. So here at the dot, where this spiral begins, in our theory, in my theory, is your origin story. Is your creation myth. What happened at the moment of conception, what happened during pregnancy, what happened at birth story, and then your 0 to 7. So either one of those is going to be the dot right there that starts your story, your origin, your creation myth. And you need to know that, and you need to know your clients. And like I said to you, all stories take us to that dot. So if you listen, you're going to know what that dot is. If you have the chart, even easier, okay? But you're going to listen, and that client is going to tell you what their origin story is, even if they don't know their conception, their pregnancy, or their birth story, because they have the 0 to 7. So just name that dot right there, the 0 to 7 if you want. But that's your origin story. That's your creation myth. I told you, we don't change. That story is expounded upon over and over and over again in this lifetime. That's it. That's all you got. My website says, own your story, own your life. Not change it, own it. You have to own who you are, where you come from, your roots, your values, all of that. You do have some wiggle room for change. Obviously, that's the point of counseling. But really, that story is just going to grow and grow and grow, hopefully in a healthier way, as you put in what I call the hard edges. So this Fibonacci sequence is found in nature. And I'm going to show you, let me just skip to that slide a second so you can see it, and then I'll go back. go back there. Hold on, where is it? It's a code. There it is. Okay. It starts at 0, age 0, so conception. Then it goes to age 1. This is me extrapolating this to human development. This is how it is in nature. This is the pattern of the cycle is rooted on these numbers, okay? 0 plus 1 is 1. 1 plus 1 is 2. 2 plus 1 is 3. 3 plus 2 is 5. 5 plus 3 is 8, and so forth. I stopped it at 89. First of all, the next number would be 144, and no one's lived to 144. So I stopped it at 89. And astrologically, we quote unquote die at 84, even though people obviously live beyond that. So that's why I picked this. And I'm going to explain Jupiter in a moment and why spiritual rules your spiritual growth. Even though Saturn are the skinny cows, even though Saturn are the hard edges, even though Saturn is the limitation that you come to be castrated in this world by your parents, society, whatever, wherever Saturn is in your chart, it's Jupiter with his soft edges that I'm going to talk more about later that you actually grow spiritually. And that's why this loop is just like this loop of the spiral and the Fibonacci code sequence. And we only have up to 12 cycles in this lifetime, and I'll talk about the symbology of that in a minute. Okay. So you've got a spiral life, and now you see all these little squares. These squares are sort of the math calculations, and it speaks to symmetry. So when we look at beauty, whether it's in art, in nature, in a painting, the Mona Lisa, the Last Supper, we're all sort of built upon this sequence. What happens is this creates symmetry or beauty to the human eye. So people's faces that are considered beautiful, traditional beauty, obviously beauty's in the eye of the beholder, follows this sort of sequence. And if you Google it, you'll see pictures of models and stuff where they put the Fibonacci sequence on the face and you can see the symmetry, okay? This golden ratio. So I'm using them interchangeably, even though there's a little difference, but in the literature, you'll see it's pretty similar. So you start here at the creation myth. You grow, 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 spirally in your life. I'll go into that a bit in a minute. And you've got all these little squares. So this is what I'm calling the soft corners. And this is what I'm calling the hard edges, okay? We need both. In our life, life will create those opportunities of hard edges and soft corners for us. And for your experience as a counselor, you need both. And this is supremely important. If you do not offer your client both, you're not balanced as a therapist. Okay, so we're going to talk about that a bit. So let me start with this, which is the same golden spiral. And I want to talk to you about this symbol, which is Jupiter. So I always take it back to mythology. Jupiter or Zeus is the king of Olympus. I've mentioned before that we need to dethrone our parents, and you can go to Jupiter in your chart and find out where you need to dethrone them. It's usually not, according to Jupiter, Saturn is the harder process. It's usually not that hard to dethrone your parent in this particular part because there's some soft edges, some ease around it, some compassion, some love. We'll get to the words in a minute. But what I want to show you is the glyph for Jupiter. It looks like a big 4, right? And here's the loop. It's the same loop as the spiral in nature, the seasons, the cycles in nature, beauty in nature, the soft corners that you need in your own life, and the soft corners that you need to give your client in counseling. This is the sequence. It does not change. It just goes on and on and on and on. Some people will say 0 days, 1 day, 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. I was using years in terms of your cycles through your lifetime. It doesn't matter. This is what's found in the Fibonacci sequence throughout art and nature and beauty. This represents the soft corners. This is compassion, empathy, vulnerability, love, things like that, that we have to give ourselves first and foremost Only when we give ourselves those qualities can we actually dethrone our parents. So that's the first thing. But we have to give this to the client. This is absolute therapeutic relationship when you start a cycle with a client. You need to listen, you need to have empathy, you need to listen with attention, you have to make them feel loved. These soft corners are important. But what happens in counseling is sometimes we forget the hard edges. And without the hard edges, like I said, that door to self is never, ever going to get achieved. And so therapists oftentimes have difficulty with these hard edges. What's funny is that we don't have difficulty with those hard edges with ourselves in terms of abuse, negative thoughts, competitive voices. We beat ourselves up. But for some reason, we won't, not that we want to beat up our client, but we don't want to have hard edges or enforce discipline or a behavior change or a limitation on our client. So one of my friends yesterday, we were talking about Pinocchio, and she said that there's, I guess, a meme that they say Pinocchio would be a really bad therapist or a bad motivational speaker, because the motivational speaker would be like, you're number one, you're great, you're the best, you're enough. And he would be lying. Well, as therapists, we get very much caught up in this, and it doesn't help the client. Now, I admit I'm a little bit too much hard edge. I'm learning too much hard corners. I need to learn the soft edges. So I'm working on that. So you can be that truth teller raw, but even me, I need to soften my edges too, because my style is very rough. But most therapists don't want to say anything, don't want to talk to the client about anything. And then what's the point? You need the balance, okay? So I have a theory called hard edges and soft corners. And so think of the construction of a house, and this is one of the reasons I like this symbol, is here is the house, right? The outside structure, the doors, and the little triangle on top is like the roof. And inside is the kingdom or the family or the self, whatever you want to call it. In order to build a house properly, you need a strong foundation that's going to be your values. You need to know your values, very clear, and your client needs to know their values, their rule book, their religion, their discipline, whatever word you want to call it. Everybody has this. So you have to get very, very clear on what that foundation is built on, okay? And you got to pick a side. This idea that you don't pick a side, that you're neutral, that you sit on the fence, no, that is not how this works. You will not be able to penetrate life. You will not be able to move in the world because you'll be too fearful and cowardly that you'll sit on the fence. So you need to have your client commit to something. When they sign up for your therapy model, they're basically committing to your theory, your therapy style. My clients have to buy in, at least for the hour they're with me, to my belief systems. They're buying into that. Then they can throw it out the window when they're done. But during the session, you have to have your client buy into something. That's why we talk about our theoretical perspective from day one. We tell them this is how I practice, okay? So you have to know what foundation you are built on and your client is built on. It's like building a house, the hard edges. So they're already coming with a value system. You already have your value system and your theoretical perspective. You're going to build on that. You must have clients identify the discipline, their theory, their belief system, their judgments, whatever you want to call it. You must help them set boundaries. This is just counseling 101. If you are not doing this, you are not building a foundation with your client, and therapy is useless. It's just you saying, yes, you're great, you're great, you're great, and that's okay, but you need maybe around third session, if not earlier, like me, start with the hard edges. A client needs discipline. They need boundaries. So my theory is self versus selfish. The way that a client achieves boundaries in my theory is you're either acting in self, the 48 to 52, and you're not doing the other person's work, whether it's your kid, whether it's your spouse, whether it's your employer, and you stay on your side of the street, or you're being selfish. You're giving too much, quote unquote, supposedly unconditional love that I don't believe in, and you're victim and martyr. So that's my theory. You come up with your own language, you pick up your theory that you believe in, but this has to be established in a therapeutic session and in your life. Obviously, remember, this is all about you and then to your client. Commitment. You have to commit to something. You have to be accountable for something, and you need routine and responsibility. So I've told you that my dog is named Dino, short for Dinacharya. Dinacharya is the Sanskrit word that means daily routine. Because I lack the earth element, I have difficulty with the hard edges, not with clients, with myself, the discipline. I set good boundaries and stuff like that, but I have a lot of difficulty with the routine. So one of the things I teach when I teach spirituality is have a reverence, have a practice. Even if it's just 5 minutes a day, it doesn't matter. It's the consistency. I do that fine. I have trouble walking the dog. So I have to bring the earth element of walking the dog, for instance, in my life. You have to identify the missing element and have the client incorporate the hard edges or the discipline and the routine with that missing element a little every day. This is going deep, not wide. You don't need them to span a lot. You need them to make small little steps, but they go deep, 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 and they're digging sort of.
Walking the dog. I'm walking Archie right now.
Okay. Hi, Archie. Next is the soft corners. As therapists and ourselves often, we love the soft corners. Compassion, rest, relaxation, acceptance, being, love. We love that. We want to tell the client how great they are. We want to tell them to relax. Oh, go meditate. Oh, just give yourself some self-love. I can't stand this shit. Self-love, self-love, self-love. That's the key thing of the word today. And it's the truth. That is the answer to the sun in the astrology chart. Icarus reaching, as much as he can to the sun. I told you the other day about original sin, missing the mark. Self-love, third chakra. That is the answer. But it is not only self-compassion. It is not only resting. It is not only accepting. It is not only being. You need the active force. You need the doing. You need to be a hard ass with yourself sometimes. Seriously, yesterday I was walking Dino, and I told you guys that the book that I'm writing, not these that are working on therapeutic models, but like the book that's going to be my life story, everything, is called Spirit Dog. And it's Dino telling my story. And I took him for a walk because I've been doing my Dinacharya and I've been doing my routine. And he looks at me, and this dog says to me, if you don't take care of me, I'm not going to take care of you. Because I want that book to put me on the map. I want that book to be the bestseller. I want that book to make me what I am or what I think I am. And he looked at me and said, yeah, no, it doesn't work that way. I mean, loud and clear, my dog yelled at me telepathically, obviously, but I have that gift. So I know what I have to do, and I do a lot of work, but I have a damn trouble with the daily routine. I shifted my entire diet. That's been a huge area for me that I've been working on, the routine and the commitment and the responsibility and eating well and stuff like that. Check. But there's still more. There's still more. I have to manage my money. I have to, sleep enough. I mean, all the things that we have to do. Those hard edges is what leads to the soft corners of self-love. It's not the other way around. You can put visualizations and you can put Post-its all around your freaking thing. You're great. No one beats you. You're awesome. Live your best life. That's not going to get you shit if you do not put it in order. So this self-love movement, great. Again, misnomer, because no one's talking about the hard edges. No one's talking about these squares. That's the foundation. If you don't change the foundation of why you don't love yourself and dethrone your parents and know your crap, you're not changing shit. That's just the reality of it. And a lot of these models, in my opinion, it doesn't mean that they don't work. Please, take a theory, any theory. You need a theoretical perspective. But one of the reasons I'm not really buying into a lot of them is that they're short-lived. The change is short, and they're not addressing, which is my whole philosophy, the subconscious pattern, the origin story, the creation myth. And again, it's not about changing it, it's about owning it. And that's even only part of the thing, because I've told you the awareness is only part of it. the integration, and then doing it differently. So in essence, you do quote unquote change the story. You might change the end of the story in the myth, but the myth is the myth that you're living. Okay? So we need to find a balance. So I was listening to, I think I told you guys this the other day, I was listening to a Jungian podcast a few weeks ago, and they do a lot of dream analysis. And the guy in the podcast said that the dreamer said that he was at some like sort of spiritual retreat, and everyone in the spiritual retreat was pleasuring themselves sexually. And the analysis of the dream was that sometimes in therapy, quote unquote, the spiritual retreat, is that all we're doing is kind of playing with each other, like jerking each other off. Like I just sit there and tell you how great you are, and we never get anything at the end of the sessions. Nothing happens. You need to have hard edges with your clients. You just have to. Most importantly, this is about yourself. I don't want you to beat yourself up. I don't want you to be the fakir and make yourself the scapegoat and beat yourself up. I already talked to you about suffering, and people love to suffer. People love their pain. Pain and pleasure, same thing, same side, same coin, different side. That is all suffering unnecessarily. This is not what I'm saying. You need the compassion and the love and the rest and all that. But I need to go take a walk. You need to put in the four corners. You need to put the earth element. You need to put in these hard edges, which is in the symbol here, in order to get the soft corners. But the foundation is creating hard edges. Around that, you build the house. Then you put the pretty paint colors, and you buy the curtains, and you buy the cushions. But if you don't have a foundation, then what are you decorating? So don't hang decorations on your client, and most importantly, you. If you haven't established your values, if you haven't established some sort of boundary, if you haven't started some sort of discipline, and this could be with behavior change. With me, it's spiritual, mainly because that's what I work with, spiritual discipline, so to speak. This is not about saving the world. I always say to you, no, I don't heal anybody. I'm here to heal myself, and if you get something from it, great. So I need my discipline. I need to model the behavior for you. And if you're not living it, then you're a hypocrite to your client. And everything you're telling him or her to say and do is what you need to do for yourself, and you're probably not doing it. So we are constantly in a spiral of growth and self-analysis, and I always call it the feedback loop. What did I tell that client? I have to read my notes, apply it to self. It's a feedback loop. This is the spiral of growth. I'm going to take it to nature and to spirituality in a minute, and just growth as a human being, okay? Any questions on the need for hard edges and soft corners? If you're too hard on yourself, you might be very kind to your client because you're already in the system. Remember, the system only has 100%. So if you're hard on yourself, you might be very soft on your client. If you're very hard on your client, you might be too soft on yourself. We want to find the 48 to 52. We want to find the balance where both your client and yourself has the hard edges and your soft corners. The hard edges starts with the values. You need to know what values you have and what values your client has. I had a client this morning, and we went straight to the value system. She's dating, and I'm like, what's your values around dating? And she's an older woman. Talk to me. And she couldn't. She was like, I don't know. I said, you do know. You're just ashamed. You're embarrassed. You don't want to own them. So you have to make your client a little uncomfortable and ask the hard questions. That's part of it. You're not going to achieve anything if you don't do that. Anything in nature comes from a winter. Then you get the rebirth in spring. In alchemy, we call it the negredo. You've got to go into that dark cave with yourself, look at your subconscious, look at your shadow, and come out the victor. In astrology, it's the 8th house of the Hydra to come out the spiritual teacher and the archer in Sagittarius. Every single system, whether it's psychology, mythology, metaphysics, spirituality, has the same cycle. We can't try to achieve soft corners without the hard edges. It does not work. So this brings me to yourself. I've said this to you multiple times. This is not about your client, it's about yourself. Unfortunately, therapists do harm when they don't do their own work. You're gonna have judgments. Accept it, move on. You are human. Your judgments, A, are linked to your values. So if you have no clue what your values are, look at what you're judging, in private or in public. Those are directly related. But judgments are confessions. So if someone says to me, oh, Francis, you want to be famous? Famous people suck. Confession, talk to me about where the story is, what happened, who do you know that's famous that went awry? There's some story. So when you hear your client, and of course yourself, judging, ask for the story. There's always a story, and the story will unravel and tell you everything. We'll go back to that little origin spot in the golden spiral, because every single system is a spiral, and you're going to go back to that dot. In nature, you're going to go to the seed that was planted. And now you're reaping the benefits of the tree, of the mango, of whatever it is, the tulip, whatever it is that you have, beautifully to enjoy. You have to check yourself. Nothing advice that, and we don't give advice, but for lack of a better word, any advice that you're giving, any guidance that you're providing is for yourself. And if you're making a judgment, it's about something in you that's unresolved. Do not put this on your client. If you're uncomfortable hearing your client talking about cheating on her husband, it is your issue. Look and see what that is about. Go to your value system, go to your shadow, do your work. I always say to my clients, do your work so your children don't have to do it for you. Children are picking up the slack of the unmet needs that the parents had. Therapy to client is the same exact thing. Your client doesn't have to do your work for you. Do your work. Don't make your client suffer and feel guilty and bad about his or her desires to cheat or snort cocaine or have an orgy or whatever the hell it is, because you haven't figured out your crap. Judgments are confessions, and they are linked to your values. Do that homework. Fill in your buckets. Figure out the value system. That's all in my first book, and I'm going to post the workbook to the Dethroning Olympus, because this is the family systems workbook that the parents, hopefully the parents and the children do together. But you have to know your values. You have to know what you're still committed to, that Costco card, and what you're not committed to with your family. It's the only way to dethrone the parents. But if you don't resolve this, you're going to put this on your client over and over and over again. And I'm going to tell you, if you can't put hard edges on your client, that's speaking of your value system. That's speaking of your judgment. Oh, that's bad. It's bad? It's bad to give someone structure. It's bad to give someone rules. It's bad to give someone discipline. It's bad to give someone boundaries. What happens when you drive and you get a red light or stop sign? If it's not there, you're going to crash. Ridiculousness that we don't want to give clients and ourselves boundaries and discipline and limitations. We have this notion that we're God and we deserve bullshit. We need hard edges. Your house would collapse on you, and you wouldn't be in your comfy soft corner mattress if the roof was caving in. And not to tell you, as within, so without, another metaphysical law called the Law of Correspondence, that actually happens to people. Their houses flood, their roof caves in, their house goes on fire. All of that that's happening to your house is a resemblance of what's happening inside. When my floor flooded in my old house, in my spiritual room, I used to have laminate. Laminate's very cheap, like cardboard. It's pretty, but it's cheapy. The floor flooded, and I knew immediately my foundation was changing. I think I had just gotten diagnosed or was about to get diagnosed. And it's been 5 years of my foundation totally changing. And what did I replace that laminate with? With tile that looked like wood, but tile. Strong, a stronger foundation. So when something is happening in your house physically or your client's house physically, it is a representation of what's happening inside in that inner circle. That's why it looks like a house. You need the boundaries, you need the 2x4s, you need whatever, I don't know anything about electricity or construction, but you need that. And here's your little roof in order to get access to the inside. You're not going to have a nice meal if the roof is caving in. So don't try to build your client's life or your life around the softness and the cushions and the curtains, because the roof is going to cave in. And if your floor is collapsing and your roof is caving in your life, the universe is telling you something. As within, so without. That's the big circle and the little circle. If it's showing up in your client, it's in you. Figure that out. Do not put that on your client. This is a huge thing. If you learn nothing from me in these years, it's that. So here is a labyrinth, and you guys know I love the labyrinth, and I have it in the classroom, and maybe post-COVID we can all walk the labyrinth again. But some of you have taken my class where we've walked the labyrinth. If you don't have access to a labyrinth locally, there is a labyrinthlocator.com, and you put your zip code, you can find labyrinths. I think the closest one to us might be Miami Lakes. There is 2 of them at the Duncan Center in Delray. And I think there's one maybe around Homestead, but I think the closest one to us is on Miami Lakes, on Miami Lakes Drive. But if you go to labyrinthlocator.com, you can find it. If not, you can use this picture or you can Google Labyrinth. There's a bunch of different ones. This is my personal favorite, the Sharks Labyrinth. And I'm going to break it down to you in a second. This is a representation like the spiral. The thing is, it's 3D, it's flat, okay? So when you are walking the labyrinth, here you go, you're walking, walking, walking. Here, look how close you are to the center. I just started the walk, and right touching the center. You're actually really, really far away. This would be your early years, if we're looking at this like the lifetime. When you get around here outside, these are called circuits. All these little circles are called circuits. When you're getting closer to the center, you actually feel like you're further apart. And this is a metaphor you can use with your clients. I assign the labyrinth walk, whether it's a finger labyrinth walk or going to a labyrinth walk, my clients a bit. First of all, these are the 4 lobes of the brain. You see how they're cut between right hemisphere and left hemisphere? And the circuits crisscross. When the circuits crisscross, it's a connection of left brain, right brain. And that's what we want. That's the proper sort of functioning. So the 4 aspects, or the 4 corners of the brain, so to speak, are represented here. This also is represented the 4 seasons, the 4 stages of the lifetime, the 4 races, the 4 directions in shamanism. The number 4, I've told you repeatedly, has to do with limitation, the earth element, discipline, the hard edges, even though this is round, which is also symbolic, there's a reason that there's round corners, has to do with the brain, has to do with development, has to do with the spiritual practice, whatever discipline you give yourself. Okay, there's 4. The number 4 goes back here to the square. The square has 4 sides. In the Asian religions or traditions or philosophy, 4 is associated with death. The reasons associated with death is because the body is what dies, not the soul. You cannot be all round corners, the soul, in the picture of the big circle, without the body, which is the element that dies. So here's a perfect 3D representation of the further you feel, so that's when crisis, skinny cows, when people come to see us, they think they're so far from their center, they think they're so far from their truth. They're really not. They're just on the outside circuits. Our job is to demonstrate to them that they're really not that far from the last time they were in crisis. And they're closer actually to getting their center, to achieving wholeness, which is the purpose of the lifetime. But the 4, the quadrants, the seasons, the directions, whatever you want to call it, is surrounded with soft edges, soft corners. You need the softness, the spirit, the circle, in order to do the work. It cannot be all work, 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 and no play. First chakra, we talked about that the other day in the fairy tale lecture. So many years ago, I had this thing at my house called 4 Shamans One Evening, and there were some shaman students that I had. And I had the labyrinth laid out. And I remember it was right before I got cancer. I was walking the labyrinth and I was on the outer circuit, and there was a tree that was sort of creating, it was pitch black because my backyard didn't really have that much light, and it was nighttime, and this tree was covering. And I remember walking just a small portion of this outer circuit and trembling and crying and so scared. And I was like, oh my God, I'm so far from the center. I am so far from myself. And what I understood that represented was these 5 years of the cancer, the divorce, the house, the kids, the chemo, all that stuff. It was a short little passage in the bigness of my life, but it was a very dark, scary one. And that night when I walked the labyrinth, I felt it, and I was just starting that cycle because shortly after that, I got cancer and divorced. So whatever happens on the labyrinth is manifestation or representation of what's happening to self. The labyrinth represents our lifetime. It represents what we're living. So it's a good activity to have your clients walk it and then share with you what they felt, or you walk it and see what you feel. Everything you get on the labyrinth is a message. But in essence, the further out I was actually closer to the center, which is now, than I ever had been in my life. So over here, where you think you're so close, go look, it's right there. You could just hop in. You actually just started. So when your clients come with a Saturn, or what I call a skinny cow, which is the limitation of their life, their fear, they're afraid they had a loss, a death, a grief, whatever it is, they're actually closer to achieving sort of life's goal and purpose and understanding man, know thyself, understanding themselves. So those hard times, those hard edges, this representation of the quadrants is actually getting closer to self. So this is where I want you to take out your astrology chart. If you don't have it, you can look at it later. If you need help, shoot me a text after class and I'll look it up for you. I want you to go to your chart, and yours is going to look maybe different than mine because you have a different app. And I want you to go to the 5th house cusp. These lines are called cusps, okay? And I want you to see what sign is at the cusp. In my case, it's Aries. Okay, so this is Taurus, this is Gemini, Cancer, and they go in order. Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sag, Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces. So they all go in order. So whatever you have on the 5th house cusp is going to be how you grow in your spiral and what your focus is. And you can do this with a client, what they focus on in order for their spiritual growth, their self-love, their hard edges, their soft corners. This is a very quickie, just like the elements, a quickie sort of shout out to what they have to do and what they have to master in this life. I'm going to talk about self-mastery in a bit. So find your cusp, this sign, Aries. If you don't know what planet rules Aries or Taurus or Gemini, whatever, Keisha, you can't find the cusp. You have to find the cusp. It's right there. Every chart has it. So you have a sign. If anything, send me your details after class and I'll look for you. That sign, in my case, Aries, relates to a planet. The Aries planet is Mars. So that's the second step to this activity. And you don't need to know this by heart. You can bring up a client and you don't need the birth, well, you kind of need the birthday for this, the birth time, because the cusp is related on the time. So you do need that. I lied. So whatever cusp is there, the 5th house has several meanings. The 5th house is children, anything you create, so books, artwork, music, poetry, a post on Instagram, anything that you create is in the 5th house, okay? So that's going to talk about your children, your creation. But the biggest creation that exists, the only creation really that exists in this life is you becoming your son, is you loving yourself, is you finding that 48 to 52 that I'm going to talk about in a second, what it looks like for you and your client, because it's not one size fits all. This is proof it's not one size fits all. Everyone has a circle, but not everybody's cusp is ruled by Aries. So that's one reason why one size doesn't fit all. You need a theory, and astrology is a theory, a perspective, a philosophy, but then you have to tailor it to the client and to yourself. But it's also the house of self-love. It's the house of growth. So in my new book, that's the Family Systems, the Dethroning Olympus, that I talked to you guys a little bit the other day, I told you to calculate your number in your family. The number energy that you come with speaks to the role you came in your family. So when I was gathering my data for the book, I found out I had 1-5 for children, not in my family, but one of the case studies that I'm working with. And I was doing the theory, and it's like the number 5, which correlates to numerology, correlates to astrology, correlates to many principles, is where you grow proportion. You never change the shape, ever. It grows and grows and grows, just like the Fibonacci sequence, just like the golden spiral. If you make this over and over and over again, it's going to basically be like the spiral of the labyrinth. If you look at this, it's going to be the pineapple. It's going to be the seashell. So the spiral starts little and grows and grows and grows. The 5th house cusp and the planet, and I'll talk about that in a minute, tells you about you, your client, me about you, your client, where that person's origin story started. What started there that in this life is growing and growing and growing. Own your story, own your life. Know your myth, your creation story, your conception, your 0 to 7. I don't care what you call it. That is going to grow exponentially over and over and over. But that is the answer. That is the answer to your growth. Don't look at it elsewhere. You've got a bunch of stuff in the chart. I'm not saying that this is the only thing, but if I want to go straight to the response to question of hard edges and soft corners and achieving self-love and self-mastery, this is it. This is going to be the spiral in my life over and over and over again. So it's ruled by Aries, and you have to find the planet that rules your 5th house cusp. In my case is Mars, and it's in my 2nd house. The 2nd house has to do with money and values. Anybody who knows me knows that my values are my life. My values is the foundation of my life. Have I misguided that energy with making money to feel worthy, to have value? Absolutely. That's a low vibration. That's a low level of consciousness. I talked to you about the missing element. This is my only earth element, so of course I misdirected that. And if you want to know how to grow proportionately in this lifetime, how to achieve self-mastery and self-love, look at the cusp of the 5th, find the planet. And like I said, you can text me in the group chat after class and I'll look at you. You do need your birth time for this, okay? This is a super, super important thing. Now, people grow at different rates. Everybody is not one size fits all. I am obsessed with growth. I am obsessed. It's part of my origin story. I grew up in a foundation, in a cult, in teachings for self-growth and self-analysis and obsession. I'm obsessive. I've got to tone that down too. But if your client grows a little bit, a little seashell, great. They're always going to grow. I named this lecture Upwards and Onwards. Growth is always upwards and onwards. It's always a spiral. No one sits still. There is another metaphysical law called the principle of vibration. Everything vibrates. Einstein wrote about this. Everything, even the rock, even your table has a vibration. Nothing stands still. So you have no option but to grow in this life. Now you get to decide, do you take a tiny little step? I don't care, that's growth. Or do you take big leaps and bounds? That's growth. Every single human being must grow something, upward and onward. You get to decide, that's your level of consciousness, that's your free will. Your client decides that, not you for the client. How big that spiral is going to go. Are they going to have one little circuit right around here, or are they going to walk the whole labyrinth until they reach themselves, until they reach right there, unification with the outer world and the inner world? The barriers to that is the triangle, which is the thoughts, and the hard edges that they put in their life. Their daily routine, their boundaries, the four corners, the limitation, the responsibility, the discipline. If they don't address their thoughts and they don't address their limitations and their boundaries, they're not going to achieve very close to that center circle. But something they will, because the universe dictates that this is the spiral, and it's always upward and onward, always. Nobody stands still. Metaphysical law. So I go always to the metaphysical principle to dictate anything in psychology, because the root of psychology, if we're going to the origin story, is metaphysics. So you have to go to metaphysics and philosophy to understand psychology. So that's why I always bring you back and mythology. These three things you need to kind of understand to understand where someone created a philosophical perspective. If you don't want to, it's not in the books, that's your choice. That's how I teach, and I always bring you back to that. But this is going to be the greatest spiral growth, but the client decides. It's not one size fits all. This is not Procrusto, where you stretch them on the bed or chop their legs off and this is what they're going to achieve with you. That is not your job. So this brings me to self-mastery. So you guys know I'm obsessed with the 48 to 52, with equanimity, with the balance. The only disease is imbalance, all that great stuff that I teach you. And balance is ultimately the goal, okay? In the spiritual text, self-mastery, which is linked to this principle of rhythm that I told you this lecture is about, the law says that there are swings, 0 to 100, my terminology, and self-mastery or equanimity is at the 48 to 52. However, do you really want equanimity? And we talked about this with the elements the other day. Do you really want balance, air, earth, fire, and water? Maybe it's a little boring. Maybe it's not exciting. You gotta know yourself. Do you like a little drama? Do you like a little chaos? If you do, own that. I had a client this morning. She's older. We were talking about this. She's dating. So I gave her an assignment. I'm going to show you in a minute what the balance is. What is a partner that represents the 48 to 52? Well, we came to the conclusion based on her value systems, and this is kind of where you have to know yourself. This is man, know thyself, and you will know the wonders of the universe. That's a little boring for her. She likes a feisty guy. She likes a guy that maybe is a little dickish. That's okay. I call that a little to the left. Are you a little to the left of the 48 to 52? Are you a little to the right? I'm a little to the left. I don't personally think that in this lifetime I'm ever going to achieve equanimity or self-mastery. I don't know. I'm so pendulum swing 0 to 100, 0 to 100, that I would find that maybe impossible. Who knows? Maybe I'm 90 and I calm down. So I'm a little to the left, and I term that, I coined that phrase a little to the left, actually, and I'm going to show you a picture in metaphysics, because I feel that I live a little to the left. I'm constantly in this space of the numinous, or the objective psyche, as Jung called it, spirituality, talking to the guides, getting messages, whatever you want to call it. So I always feel like I'm a little to the left, and you're going to see the picture where I got that idea from. And so this showed up to the client today, and I said, well, let's define the guy you're looking for right here. Maybe 40 to 48. She doesn't want a tyrant. She doesn't want a 0 to 10, maybe, like a real asshole. Her father was a tyrant. But she doesn't want someone so super boring either. So you can break down this. Maybe I'll make that another slide, another poster, where I put little different, numbers, 0 to 10, 10 to 20, whatever. This is pretty much where I feel I live. I live maybe 40 to 48. Okay, that's maybe where I kind of feel that that's where my growth lies, or what I'm going to accomplish in this lifetime. So I don't know how many of you want to come to the dark side, the shadow side of the love languages, but one of the things that I'm going to explain is your moon phase. This has a lot to do with the moon phase you're born. I happen to be born in a crescent moon phase, which would be right about here. It's on its way to becoming a full moon. And you're going to see in your life a parallel between your moon phase and where you fall on perhaps what you feel comfortable with your growth. And that's a theory I'm working on, but I'm seeing it in a lot of clients to be true. So if you come to that lecture, you'll hear me say that. So self-mastery, going back to the original quote of the Oracle at Delphi, man, know thyself, and ye will know the wonders of the universe. So here's the Delphi. Man, know thyself, the inner circle, and you will know the wonders of the universe, the outer circle. These temples in Greece, Turkey, Persia, all these ancient sort of Mesopotamia are somewhat, they're sundials. They're a way to kind of see where the sun is too. Stonehenge, there's a lot of philosophy about that. I don't know too much about it, but a lot of them have to do with capturing sort of that sun. And the sun symbolically, again, has to do with ourselves. The divine spark of God has to do with the sun in terms of our astrology chart. I have to become the sun. It goes back to the original sin. I missed the mark. Where do I miss the mark in myself? Things like that. So that's why that's one of the representations of that particular theory of man, know thyself. Knowing yourself is not achieving a one-size-fits-all. This is not a Procrusto. Every one of your clients is not going to love themselves or master themselves the same exact way. I am a theory person. I write theory. I write manuals. I write workbooks. Here are tools. But this does not mean that your way is my way. There is a foundation. There are hard edges. That's the theory. These are my theories. But the person, for instance, is going to fall somewhere. These are the soft corners. You see the circles somewhere in there. And that's going to be their truth. You are not to shift their truth. Also, growth is proportional, like the spiral. If they want to achieve self-mastery, this perfection at 48 to 52, as equanimity, great. They're going to decide that. Their spiral is going to grow to the biggest spiral there is, the full labyrinth, let's say. But someone might only want to make a small little spiral change, or something small, one little soft corner. Again, that is their choice. Your theory, and that you practice with, your rules of your practice, what they have to do, pay on time, show up on time, all those hard edges, is going to be how you fit them into your theory and in the philosophy and all that. But you're going to work with them depending on what they want, how they want to achieve those soft edges, and you giving certain, compassion, but there's limitations within that in each client. So this is not a one size fits all. So your growth way is not the way that everybody else grows either. And the size of your growth is not proportionate to how everybody else grows either. And you have to check that. So if you're obsessed like me with spiritual growth, I'll be very, very disappointed if I think every single person is going to be at that same level. No, I bring it down to somewhere. I know that everyone has to grow. Everyone has to make a change because the law dictates and nature dictates and the spiral dictates and the Fibonacci sequence dictates. But the client has free will to choose how big that spiral is going to go. So here is the 0, the 100, and then the 48 to 52 using the law of rhythm or the principle of rhythm or the law of the pendulum. So when you're with a client, but of course first for self, whatever the topic is in your life, with this woman today it was dating. So finding a partner, your money, your job, your career, your health, it does not matter. You pick a sector in your life. This works for every sector, but like I mentioned in my first book, your rule book split it up into sections. Your health, your money, sex, relationships, friendships, so that you could do this 0 to 148 to 52 and find out where you fit on it when you're doing it. Start identifying the qualities that resemble the 0 and the 100. So I'm just going to use the example of the king, which I've been using a lot. A king that's a 0 is a tyrant. A king that's 100 might be all order and all balance. What's the middle of that? Maybe it's a king that helps you dig holes, that helps you plant the plants and lets you come into the kingdom. I don't know, you decide. I'm just using the metaphor of the king, okay? If it's your work, what's your horrible work scenario? What's your ideal work scenario? And what's the middle of that? You have to get clear on these particulars before I take you to the next slide. It's not one size fits all, but it does require honesty. You have to know the truth. The therapist's job, hopefully, as is my clients, is to call my clients, the hard edges, on their bullshit. And I call bullshit all the time on clients. So you can call it bullshit, you can call it a hard edge, you can call it a discipline, a limitation, a boundary, I don't care. It's all the same thing. You need to check yourself, obviously, and then check your clients when they're lying to themselves, because people live in delusion, they're deluded, they're in their snow globe, and you may not go with a sledgehammer and shatter their snow globe the way that I do, or you have to do some version at it, tap, 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 if that's your style. That's how you're going to do it. But you've got to talk truth. You've got to rip the veil off. If not, you're not helping clients and you're taking their money. So I brought the 48 to 52 to the symbol of the caduceus. A few weeks ago, I gave you the chakras, I gave you the unmet needs, I gave you the fairy tales. So why do I decide to bring this symbol back to today? This symbol is the caduceus, and this symbol is, and I think some of you attended the lecture, representative of Hermes Trismegistus. Hermes Trismegistus is the father of metaphysics. He's sort of the father of spirituality. All metaphysical, which I told you a moment ago, then leads to philosophy, that then leads to psychology, all starts with Hermes Trismegistus. This is his symbol. Funny enough, it's the symbol of the medical doctor. And it has nothing to do with the medical doctor. It actually has to do with energetic medicine and the chakras. But as we know, and I have a chapter in the book, the body is loyal servant to the psyche. Whatever's happening in the energy field, whatever's happening in the mind is then going to lead to illness in the physical body if you don't address it. All physical illness needs to be traced back through the spiral to that origin story of an unmet need, all of them. So in chakra language, in Sanskrit, Ida is the left serpent. Pingala is the right serpent. And the intersection between, where you see this middle column, is called the Sushumna, and the chakras are the middle column, the middle circle in between, the intersection. So I'm calling the Sushumna the central nervous system, the health of the spine, so to speak, the thing that keeps us upright. So it's definitely our hard edges, the midpoint, the 48 to 52. The chakras technically for emotional, physical, spiritual, energetic health should all be balanced at the 48 to 52. We all know that somebody has an unmet need linked to a chakra that's out of whack. We all know that someone's living a fairy tale in a 0 to 100 that's out of whack. We know that somewhere in the chart, someone's lacking an element or overcompensating for an element out of whack. So every single person has something where the 48 to 52 isn't exactly the 48 to 52. Our job in therapy is to help them get as close to that as possible. But we also have to acknowledge, which is what happened with my client this morning, is she didn't want to be totally balanced in her relationship with men. She likes a little bit of a tyrant. She likes a little chaos. She likes a little dick, a guy to keep her in her place. Fine, she owned her value system. It related back to her bad bucket of her father. It was back to her moon that is the way we love dysfunctionally, but you own it. We're not all going to achieve balance. So how do you help the client, first and foremost yourself, achieve this behavior change and decide where on the pendulum you fall? Is write qualities of zero, let's say of your partner, a zero partner, a loser partner, someone you would never date, your job, a job you would never do, and 100, your ideal. And then write the qualities of the 48 to 52, which are somewhat in the middle. If you had a balanced, quote unquote, partner, you had a balanced job, what would that look like? There's a famous movie called Practical Magic with Nicole Kidman and Sandra Bullock. And Sandra Bullock is writing on a piece of paper the qualities of her perfect partner. The thing is that there is a family curse that she's going to be widowed or the partner is going to die. And she's scared to meet a guy. So what she does is she writes everything on her paper, and then at the end she tries to screw it up and says he has to have one black eye and one blue eye, or one brown eye and one blue eye. And that's what we do. We are so afraid of balance. We are so afraid of growth. We are so afraid of being honest. We are so afraid of having the life that we should have, that we are, I don't want to say entitled or deserving, but the potential. And Marianne Williamson has a really famous quote that I believe is Nelson Mandela's that says, "Who are you to believe that you can have it all or be this great thing?" And then she writes, or Mandela says, "Who are you not to be?" We get in our own way. So I take you back to my famous perfect little description of everything. Your thoughts, the subconscious, the origin story, the triangle, and your lack of hard edges. You moan and cry that you're limited, put woe is me, my story, my story, my story, and we all have a story and we all have a wound, some more than others, and I'm not discounting it, but it's your thoughts about that wound and that conception story that keeps you from knowing yourself. That's what also keeps you from owning the divine spark, from having the balance if you want it, from having that perfect list like Sandra Bullock in that movie. So she tried tricking fate and putting brown eye and blue eye, and if you saw the movie, the guy appears and blah, blah, blah. We can get out of our own way. That's part of the therapist's job, is saying, oh, did you notice that you're trying to get in your own way? Hopefully you can learn to do that for yourself as well. If not, go to therapy. So you have to figure out what the middle ground is. Then I told you the little to the left. So this is a super famous picture of Hermes Trismegistus. This round is the earth, and here he is looking a little to the left and seeing all the wonders of the universe, the planets, the universe, the galaxies. So I say a little to the left, hashtag a little to the left is one of my hashtags, because I feel like I always live in this space. Part of me is in this earth, and part of me is in the heavens. I'm a Pisces. This is very clear to my life story. But some people want to live in the pendulum that's over here, like my client today. Some people want to be a little to the right. That's the personalization of the therapeutic relationship. First, you got to get honest and clear with the values, the hard edges, the limitations, the thoughts, what's dictating, and then where do you want to be? But you have to have the client identify what the 0 to 100 looks like and the 48 to 52, so they know what balance and health looks like in their life, and then they can choose if they want to be a little to the left or a little to the right. Those are your three options: a little to the left, a little to the right, or right in the middle, the self-mastery. Self-mastery or equanimity is believed metaphysically to be the answer. It's believed that that is when you master life. It's believed that that's when you're all in balance. But some people don't want that because that doesn't tickle their fancy, and that's okay. So you have to find out, do you really want equanimity? Do you really want to be balanced all the time? In some areas of your life you may be, but the ones that cause you problems you don't. And this is a soft corner. If you remember, I put that acceptance. Acceptance. Accepting that your spiral, you may only want to grow a little in this lifetime, and you don't do too much work. That's fine. You're going to do a little bit because you have to grow spirally. Accepting that maybe you like someone that's a little rough around the edges. Maybe you like suffering and not having money to pay your bills at the end of the month because it meets an unmet need of fight or flight when you were little and reminds you of your childhood when you suffered. That's our job as a therapist, to help the client get really clear as to why. Not judge it. That's a soft corner. But don't not talk about it. Don't not address it because it's uncomfortable and it might speak to your limitations or your fears. So self-mastery is not necessarily the one-size-fits-all approach that everybody wants. Most people don't really want to achieve perfect balance and have such a happy life because then they might feel like it's not exciting. But self-mastery is knowing yourself, knowing why you create the situation, knowing why you want the little dick of a boyfriend that you have, maybe why you don't like to have too much money in the bank. That's the self-mastery, and owning that you're creating that situation because it's serving a need, usually linked to the bad buckets, to the unmet need of the parents and that whole thing. That's the true growth. That's the spiral. That's the Fibonacci code in your life. You are going to grow. You decide how much, how little. But this takes you out of victim. This takes you out of, oh my God, this person did this to me and that person did that to me. Bullshit. You like it. You like to be challenged. You like to have a boss that challenges you. You like to be a smart ass. You like to suffer. Whatever it is. We all have a shadow. Own it. Be honest with it. You as a therapist should make your client comfortable with his or her limitations, give them some discipline, some boundaries, some hard edges, and at the same time, with the other hand, compassion, empathy, love, vulnerability, openness, all that great stuff. You're not going to achieve anything close to a middle ground, a 48 to 52, even if it's a little left or a little to the right, if you don't implement the hard edges and the soft corners. So self-mastery, even though in a lot of the text says it is, and the Kabbalion states it, when you're in that equanimity, when you're in that 48 to 52, when the pendulum isn't swinging to the right and to the left anymore, some people say, spiritual aspirants as we're called, life's boring. You don't get the high of something happening to you, but then you don't get the low of something happening to you. And that might make you feel that you're not alive. And that's okay. If that's your truth, then fine. The point of life is to live it. So if that's what makes you feel alive, own it. Own that. Own the exhilaration of not knowing where your next meal is coming from. Own the exhilaration that you don't know where your next paycheck is. Own your exhilaration that you don't know if the guy that you're dating is going to come home. We are creating these things because they're meeting unmet needs. Hopefully you can move your client out of the 0 to 100, because that's not a healthy place to be, and that's not mastering the lifetime. But finding out where they are, a little to the left of the 48 to 52 or the little to the right of the 48 to 52, that's a really good place to help your client. But you have to help them identify what the 0, 148 to 52 is before you can identify if you're a little to the left or a little to the right. So the Kabbalion says upwards and onwards. All growth is upwards and onwards. Look at a staircase. Has upwards and upwards. It makes the Fibonacci sequence. It makes the spiral. Your life is never standing still. You are always moving upwards and onwards. And remember the labyrinth. Those darkest moments, those times that you think you're furthest from the center, you're actually closest to becoming self-mastery, whatever that looks like for you. Merriam-Webster defines upwards and onwards as a toward a better condition or higher level. I want to share one thing before we wrap up about Jupiter. This is the Fibonacci sequence. You or your client, that's the free will. You have no right. Watch Bruce Almighty. He could do anything he wants, but you can't mess with a person's free will. We have absolutely no right. That is manipulation. That is what coercion is. That is what cults are about. You have no right to mess with someone's free will. You decide how you grow proportionate to your self-knowledge. How much do you want to know about yourself? How much do you want to grow? How much do you want to change? How many hard edges do you want to put in your life? So last thing before we go is the Jupiter. I calculated, based on this sequence, 12 cycles of Fibonacci sequence. 12 is the number linked to Jupiter. Jupiter goes around the entire zodiac every 12 years. When you were 12 years old, so I told you about the skinny cow that happened between 0 to 7. Now this is another layer, and you can ask your client, what happened at 12? Usually 12 to 14, but it starts at 12. Whatever you started at 12 will exponentially grow and grow and grow. That's going to be the quote unquote soft edges. The skinny cows are the hard edges, and soft corners, I should say. The hard edges are going to be the limitations. That's going to be Saturn on your chart, okay? The Jupiter in your chart by house and sign, but you just need to know it's every 12 years, is how you're going to grow the soft edges. That's going to come naturally. You don't have to do anything. You're going to be 12, you're going to be 24, you're going to be 36. When that happens, when you track that, you're going to track a Fibonacci spiral in your life. These are the Fibonacci numbers. I'm saying linked to ages, but I'm not saying that that's what the Jupiter cycle is. Don't misunderstand me. I'm simply saying, according to the Fibonacci spiral, the golden ratio, the way that we evolve in life with the soft corners, this is the sequence. And if we die at 84 according to astrology, or 144 is the next number, and we don't get there, we all have a ability to reach up to 12 cycles. 12 cycles of Jupiter, 12 cycles of soft corners, 12 cycles of expansion, 12 cycles up the staircase. The same circle, the same loop is the same of Jupiter. So where you have Jupiter is where you dethrone your parents, but in a softer way. It doesn't really provoke that many problems for you. Saturn is your castration. That we talked a little bit in the Dethroning Olympus lecture last week. So these are your soft corners. Clients aren't going to come to you when they have Jupiter cycles. They're just not. Those are the soft corners. They're going to come when they have Saturn cycles, which are the skinny cows and the hard edges. Any questions about astrology, mythology, Procrusto, the golden ratio, the Fibonacci code, Jupiter, Saturn, the fifth house, hard edge? I mean, I'm giving it to you in all different language. You pick the language you like. Hard edges, soft corners, this is Saturn, this is Jupiter, 7-year cycles, 12-year cycles, the labyrinth, you name it, upward, onward, the 48 to 52, I gave you an assignment you could do with yourself, with your client. I mean, we've got tools up the wazoo to figure this out. Any questions before we go?
No, ma'am.
Okay, let me stop the sharing and the recording. And this is all going to be in the new book, probably the Dethroning Olympus. If you want the workbook, I think I'm just going to post it to the classroom anyway. I'm going to post the Family Systems workbook because you can figure out your numerology. You can figure out how to dethrone your parents. There's a value system sheet and there's a bunch. So let me